Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. Story of my life.
I am Kay Anderson, and you are listening to Lost Spaces, a podcast that mourns the death of queer nightlife. Every episode, I talk to a different person about a venue from their past, the memories they created there, and the people that they used to know. Colin Clews is the author of Gay in the 80s, from fighting for our rights to fighting for our lives. Though he lived only briefly in London, he packed a lot in after moving here in 1984, diving headfirst into campaigning with Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, as well as volunteering for the then newly formed Terrence Higgins Trust. We met to discuss The Fallen Angel, a bar that stood in Graham Street, Islington.
The 70s kind of politicized me very, very much. Before I went to university, I was really politically naive. Um, when I was in university, I became really, really, really politically aware, if you like. So um, even though I was involved in predominantly the anti-racist movement, um, I kind of knew that politically, for want of a better expression, um, there was nothing wrong with being gay. That there should be no stigma around being gay.
Yeah.
It was almost, some of my best friends are gay. I can't, if I knew gay people, I wouldn't have any problem with them. Sort of that whole kind of thing. Um, so I'm not really sure what it was, to be quite honest. I don't know whether it was just I wasn't ready for a relationship, or I was just a bit too anxious that if I kind of started getting involved in gay stuff, then I'd have to do things more publicly, more visibly. I have to make a commitment, if you like. If I had a boyfriend, I couldn't imagine kind of being the kind of person, who has a boyfriend but then lies to anybody and everybody and try to pretend that he's just the best friend from school and all that kind of stuff. If I wanted a boyfriend, it was going to be as a boyfriend, not as somebody I know. And can you quick duck into around the corner now? Somebody I know is coming down the street. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest. I did move to Nottingham from Leicester in 1980, so I don't know whether it was kind of all my anti-racism stuff had been in Leicester, so it was, well, what am I going to do now that I'm in Nottingham? Uh, well, I know, why don't I get involved in some gay issues and see what it's really all about? I couldn't really give you, I couldn't,
Yeah.
as has become immediately apparent from me rambling on for 10 minutes, I couldn't really give you a very clear, straightforward answer to that one. I
But
don't,
yeah, but rather than dip your toe in, you flung yourself fully into the gay scene, and then you set up Gay East Midlands in 1983.
yeah.
But then the next year you moved to London.
Oh, yes, I did, because part of my long-term agenda was to move to Australia. In 1980, I met some Australians when I was on holiday in Greece. In 1982, I went to visit them in Australia and just fell wildly and madly in love with the whole place, everything about it. So I came back in 1982 from the holiday, basically thinking, I have to go to Australia. I need to go to Australia. I want to live in Australia. So I became slightly obsessed. So in 82, I started a master's degree in social work from 82 to 84. So all the time I was doing that and being involved with um, Gay East Midlands and various other things. I was also kind of trying to figure out ways that I could get a visa to go live in Australia. And it wasn't easy. So I tried a whole host of strategies, some of which I don't think we'll go into in the course of this conversation. Some riskier than others, shall we say. So by the end of 84, I'd finished my social work course, and there was really sort of nothing in my mind to keep me in England now. It was a question of all I need is a visa, and I'll be on the way to Australia. So I actually moved to London at the end of 84 with the idea that I'd just be there for a few weeks. They'd give me a visa, and I'd be on my way. Unfortunately, it didn't work out like that. So I ended up spending about a year in London, I think.
Okay.
That's when I first discovered the Fallen Angel. It's when I also became involved with Lesbians and Gay Support and Minors. It's also when I became involved with the Terrence Higgins Trust, which at that time was kind of run entirely by volunteers. So that's why I was in London in 84 initially, because I thought it was going to be just a short stay, and then I would be on my way to Australia. As I say, it didn't work out like that. It soon kind of felt very much like, I just put my entire life waiting this visa, which wasn't going to happen. So in June 85, I think, June or September 85, I moved back to Nottingham and got involved in setting up Nottingham AIDS Information Project. And because of that, I kept going to London. So I kind of had an ongoing contact with the Fallen Angel. That was the place I would go when I was in London.
Okay. I was going to say, can we talk about the venue? Can you tell us, like, physically what the venue was like?
It was what I would call an old style pub, sort of a fairly square set building on there were three floors. The downstairs was the bar, and then upstairs on the first floor was used as meeting rooms for various groups and various organisations. Lesbians and Gay Support the Minors used to meet there, for one thing. So downstairs, the bar itself, it was a kind of sort of U-shaped bar, if I remember correctly. Remember, this is going back 34 years or something. But the place was decorated within an inch of its life with all sorts of murals. On the ceiling of the bar was a picture of the eponymous falling angel. And to say the rest, it was almost like the whole place was covered in frescoes downstairs. My memory of it was predominantly pale blue, but as I say, I think that's talking 34 years ago now.
And so, do you remember your first night?
Oh God, I can't say I do, to be honest. I mean, I can remember how I felt about the place, because up until that time I'd been going into the rather more closeted venues in Nottingham. So it was a very kind of, in Nottingham, basically the situation was there weren't any exclusively gay pubs. There was a pub which the side room was the gay bar. Mm-hmm. Another one was the downstairs bar was the gay bar, and then kind of the dance halls or had these things like the first Monday of every month was gay night. It was kind of just unusual to in the first place to find an exclusively gay pub, although there were a lot of them in London, obviously. What kind of attracted me to the Fallen Angel was the fact that it was also, I feel like, had a bit of a political conscience. So they had, on Tuesday nights, they had women only nights. As I say, upstairs they let the rooms to a whole range of different queer organisations. It was a kind of gathering place for people on the left generally, I think. It served vegetarian and vegan food, which was a rarity in those days. I'm going to kind of sort of stereotype every other gay pub in London when I say this, but it wasn't the kind of meat market the way, some gay pubs you would go into. It was predominantly for the purpose of
fornication.
yes. Well, yeah, and in order to achieve that goal, it was almost like a bit of a sort of theatre going on. There was posturing and moving here and moving there and all of these things going on between different people and stuff. And the Fallen Angel didn't have any of that. It was just kind of lots of people went in, lots of people very chatty. One of the vivid memories I have of the Fallen Angel was talking to a guy one night, and he was from the northeast of England. And I said, "Oh, which part of the northeast are you from?" And he said, "Oh, you wouldn't know it really." And I kind of knew immediately it was from my hometown of Chesley Street. And I said, "Is it Chesley Street?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "That's fine." That's what I used to say to people as well when I was in London. "Where are you from?" And I'd say Durham or Newcastle, or you wouldn't know it. So yeah, so that was one enduring memory of the Fallen Angel.
Can we talk a little bit about Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners and your involvement with that? You talked already about some of the meetings happening in the Fallen Angel.
Yep.
Is that how you first got involved, through the pub?
I would have got involved. No, not through the pub. I'm just trying. It's that chicken and egg situation. I think you don't get involved with the Fallen Angel through Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, but you get involved with Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners through the Fallen. No, I know for definite it wasn't because I used to go to the Fallen Angel. I got involved with Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. When I lived in Nottingham, I was involved. I lived in Nottingham for the first 6 months of the strike, and Nottinghamshire was kind of an absolute battleground. It was a sort of a pivotal area in terms of the strike, because the majority of miners in the Nottinghamshire coalfield had decided to keep on working. So what that meant was flying pickets from other parts of the country would get bussed in to picket these working mines all of the time. And of course, Margaret Thatcher had a vested interest in breaking the miners' strike. So she in turn invested massive police resources into Nottinghamshire. So it became almost like a bit of a police state. It was quite literally the case that if you drove around various roads in Nottingham, main roads in Nottingham, you would be likely to come up to a police roadblock, and they would ask you if you didn't look like your average dad and two kids, then you would generally be interrogated as to where you were going, what you were going to do, and even which party you voted for at the last election.
Wow.
So it's kind of pretty heavy. So yeah, I mean, we regularly saw large convoys of police vehicles driving through the centre of Nottingham in the middle of the night. It was kind of, it was at that level of kind of conflict there. So I was involved with the strike centre in Nottingham, largely just collecting money before I moved to London. And then when I moved to London, or just before I moved to London, whenever it was, I'd heard about Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. So that seemed to be kind of the most obvious group to move towards. And that's how I became involved with Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners. If you like, it was a continuation of my work. And I mean, because one thing I always feel I need to say this about Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, that Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners were a group of, identified themselves as lesbians and gays, and set up specifically to support the miners. But lesbians and gays were involved in supporting miners right around the country, but not necessarily from the basis of a specific group. There were 11 Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners groups around the country by the end of the strike. But as my experience showed, in Nottingham, I was a gay man. I was working to support the miners. I wasn't involved in a specific group there. I just did it because of my political beliefs. I come from a mining community. Um, Clearly, I have sympathy with the miners. I know what the miners' life was like, and so on and so forth. Um, there were lots of lesbians involved with supporting um, the women's support groups. Yeah, there were lots of gay men involved in supporting the miners, but in lots of different ways, either through the unions raising money, through the Labour campaign for lesbian and gay rights, helping to raise money, helping to raise awareness. As I say, that's just something I always feel I need to say, that lesbian and gay activity in support of the miners was not
limited to.
It was not limited to, it was not the exclusive domain of LGSM. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that's how I came to London. That's what I used to do. When I first got there, as I say, I was waiting. I wasn't looking for work or anything like that because I was expecting to be on the plane any second. And so I volunteered at the Terrence Higgins Trust. So during the week, I volunteered during the daytime at the Terrence Higgins Trust. And in the weekends, I used to go and rattle a bucket for Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners, either outside Gays the Word bookshop or various gay pubs and clubs. Basically, that was it. I mean, that was it for the vast majority of LGSM members. That's what the group did, and that's one of the things which really impressed me, which was having been involved with the political left since the 70s. When you see different members of different groups, different left groups come together, generally there's more fighting going on than anything else. I used to be the Leicester organizer for Rock Against Racism. The political manoeuvring there between the Socialist Workers' Party, the International Marxist Group, and so on and so forth was really unhelpful. With Lesbians and Gay Support the Miners, people came from a range of different political backgrounds. There was the Communist Party, there was people from the Labour Party, there were people from the Socialist Workers' Party, people from the International Marxist Group, and so on and so forth. But rather than kind of sit and argue political points in the meetings, basically they were just strategy meetings. We did this much this week. How this pub was good, that pub was shit. What shall we do next week? Who is available to do it? And that was it, really. That was one thing which particularly impressed me about LGSM.
So you've got no gossip for me then?
Well, what kind of gossip?
No, I'm just being silly. Can you tell me about Terrence Higgins Trust and what was happening at that time and why you got involved?
Well, I mean, the first case of AIDS was reported in Britain in December 1981. It wasn't Terrence Higgins. A lot of people think that he was the first person to die. He wasn't. Terry Higgins was diagnosed in 82. And basically, the friends of Terry Higgins were so appalled at the treatment he got when he was in hospital. The whole stigma, the whole, sort of isolation, the unnecessary precautions, people refusing to actually have anything to do with them, not prepared to go in and breathe the same air, all that kind of stuff. So it was his friends who were so distressed and angry about the treatment he got, who kind of got together and started what they called the Terrence Higgins Memorial Trust. And they didn't have a great deal of kind of knowledge of kind of campaigning or fundraising or whatever. It was just a group of people who were motivated more by their anger than anything. And so they kind of rumbled along for a while. Meanwhile, London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard was being inundated with calls about AIDS, literally from all over the country. So Switchboard was certainly feeling the demand, and they knew there was a need for something. But they couldn't afford to run separate AIDS service as well.
Mm-hmm.
They were already kind of stretched to the limit as it was. So there was a conference organised in, I think it was late '82, where it was organised under the auspices of Switchboard and the Gay Medical Association, and if my memory serves me right, an organisation called the Vulcan Group, which were basically a bunch of leather or rubber fetishists, I think. And anyway, people from the Terrence Higgins Trust Memorial Fund were also involved in all of that. So basically what happened at that conference was it was agreed that Switchboard shouldn't be the organisation to respond to the AIDS crisis. Terrence Higgins Trust, as it was then, people there way out of their depth. So a number of people who had more sort of campaigning experience, people from Switchboard, kind of sort of was seconded onto the Terrence Higgins Trust to make it the organisation that we needed.
Mm-hmm.
From then that's when the kind of like the strategy developed. So from '82, '83, it was basically just building bit by bit, trying to get the resources together to put together the most basic service, telephone helpline, and produce some information for gay men to be distributed. So that set the ball rolling. Pubs and clubs had fundraisers for the Terrence Higgins Trust to get it off the ground. And I'm not quite sure when they actually got their first office space, but it was this tiny little office in Mount Pleasant. It was in one of these big buildings. It's got lots of individual offices that you rent, and there's a centralized switchboard that'll take your call and pretend to be your company and so on. So we were in this kind of very large building, sharing with all sorts of other people, including, it turns out, some people who were making gay porn movies a few doors down the corridor. And this was at a time when it was not legal. And so the first we knew it was when we came in one morning and to discover that their door had been smashed in with a sledgehammer by the police, and they'd been raided. So yeah, it was, all sorts of people were in there. So anyway, when I was joined them in whenever it was September '84, it was this one single office with one single telephone and basically an army of volunteers. And we were still trying to kind of put a sort of strategic framework around it, and what do we need, whatever. We had things like the buddies group. Right? It's basically a befriending. It's a one-to-one befriending kind of scheme. It was started by Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York to support individual people. So we had a buddies group, which was one of the first things to get off the ground. We had a medical group that it was linked into all the main medical players, if you like, in the country, and it was about kind of sort of disseminating information, sort of, if you like, translating information, medical information, into sort of understandable information. So there was that. There was this. I was a member of the social services group that was just getting up. That would be sort of basically to try and encourage social services to do their bit in providing their services to people with AIDS. Mm-hmm. Because again, a major problem that we still had at that stage was that people were still scared of it because the media were talking about it as the gay plague. A key theme in media reporting of AIDS was, it was highly infectious. It's not highly infectious. But for example, the Sun newspaper did this double-page spread on the facts about AIDS. And the strapline underneath that was, it's spreading like wildfire. That's not a fact about AIDS. That's a complete load of bullshit. But worryingly, when you kind of, you put the two together. Here's a fact: spreading like wildfire. It's that kind of it was the use of that kind of language which kind of made people think it's incredibly infectious. So consequently, people with AIDS were often facing discrimination, not just from people in the street or the neighbours, but even from service providers. So we were trying to we couldn't meet the needs of all people with AIDS ourselves, and we knew this was going to be a growing problem. So the idea was to try and kind of support the professionals out there with education and training and get them up to speed and to do that. Mm. So that was basically it. We had the AIDS helpline ran from, I think, 8 p.m. till midnight every night. So I worked in the office during the day, so I didn't usually have to do any calls like that, except for people who were so desperate who would just see the number and ring it anyway. So I did get 1 or 2 calls during the day, and again, just kind of an indication of the levels of anxiety were out there. I mean, we had one guy who used to ring up. He'd ring up one day and said, "Can you get it from?" Well, one of the things he asked me was, "Can you get it from billiard balls?" I said, "No, you can't get it from billiard balls." Okay, thank you very much. He would ring up the next day. "Can you get it from chairs?" "No, he can't get it from chairs." Okay, seemingly reassured, hung up until the next day when he rang up. "Can you get it from towel rails?" And it just, went on and on and on. But this poor guy really needed deep psychological input. His level of AIDS fear was extraordinary. Mm. I also got phone calls from the media who wanted comments. I did once have a reporter who said, I tried to explain part of the issue of blaming gay men meant that a number of men who had sex with other men actually believed that they could do what they liked, but as long as they didn't say they were gay, they'd be fine.
Wow.
And so this then led into the whole thing about gay men who get married in order to kind of conceal the fact that they're gay, but then go off and have kind of sort of anonymous sex. And because the stigma of being gay was driving them to do this. And all the time I was talking to the reporter, I was saying this, I was thinking, I know you're going to just beat this up into some hideous, we're going to blame gay men again. And I said, I actually put it to him. I said, you need to assure me that you're not going to just write yet another hysterical report about this. It's important that we talk about what the real issues are. One of the groups we need to get to are men who have sex with men who do not identify as gay. They're not, they're at risk of HIV. They may be at risk of transmitting HIV, but they're not doing it maliciously. They're doing it out of a sense of fear. We need to sort of, take an educated approach to that problem. So he said, yeah, sure, no, I promise, and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, when the article finally came out, it was the usual. I had been quoted. I had admitted that there were sort of gay men who were still out there having sex with other men, and then going and having sex with their wives, and all this. And again, the tone of it. I hadn't admitted to anything, but again, that's another way the media fit in their own agenda. Mm. To admit to something suggests that actually I'd actually been trying to conceal something. But yeah, you got it out to me. Yeah, I admit. Yes, this is the case. I didn't admit. I talked about stuff, but it was in that, our ace reporter managed to kind of get the truth out of him when he admitted something. So that's the kind of stuff that we did at Terrence Higgins Trust, and then that was also going out to local groups, giving talks about AIDS, or the little that we knew about AIDS. Yeah, so that's what I did during the week. And then, as I say, the weekend I did LGSM.
We've gone a little off topic. So sorry.
But
I really really appreciate you telling me about this, but we need to talk about the fallen angel again. So if we go back, you don't remember your first time, but do you remember what a typical night out there was like?
well, I mean, it was basically for me. It was just a place to go and have a drink, a quiet drink, and a bit of a chat and meet people, and meet people or not. It wasn't like, as I say, it wasn't a cruising ground like some gay pubs were. Um, in many ways, I was going to say it's like your average pub. It's like your average pub that serves vegan food, and has all the walls frescoed with a large fallen angel painted on the same. Typical everyday pub.
Yeah.
Yeah, just pretty ordinary. It was, I think, in a way, it was like a safe space. It was a safe space not just for being gay, but it was also a safe space for actually being a bit of a lefty, because lefties have never been exactly welcomed with open arms, including within the lesbian and gay community, who certainly in the 80s, a lot of people saw us just as troublemakers, sort of demanding gay rights, which were obviously making people antagonistic to us.
Yeah.
So it was that every now and then, sort of, on one night they had a sponsored reading of Armistead Morpan's Tales of the City. Are you familiar with Armistead?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Oh, good. Thank goodness. I was kind of had this awful feeling that, oh my God, please don't be. So there was a sponsored reading of Tales of the City, in order to raise money for the Gays the Word Defence Fund, because, as you'll know, Gays the Word were raided by the police in '84. I think there were some music nights. I don't think it was kind of disco necessarily. It was like live music nights. There were art exhibitions. The other thing about the Fallen Angel was that back in those days we had these really kind of antiquated licensing. So it could be open from 11 till 1 or 11 till 2, whatever, and then had to close until 6, and then was open from 6 to 10:30 or 11 or whatever. So what the Fallen Angel did was they turned it into a cafe from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So it wasn't just a typical night. I mean, there were days I've spent in there as well, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
it just gone in as a cafe, and just had a quiet afternoon and a chat with people.
And so, are there any songs that stick in your mind from that time of your life?
Well, because I was waiting to go to Australia, Randy Crawford's "One Day I'll Fly Away" was something that I related to particularly. "I Am What I Am" by Gloria Gaynor, because it was a kind of it was a popular song about being gay, and everybody. I know it was taken from the musical La Cage aux Folles, but nonetheless, it got into the mainstream charts, and so it was kind of, lots of people dancing into it, and it was a kind of sort of assertive song, if you like. And then the other Gloria Gaynor one, which is kind of that whole era, is "I Will Survive," and that obviously became basically the anthem of what you might call the early AIDS generation, the first people to be diagnosed with AIDS. Because this was the time, remember, it was, as I say, we had our first British death in December 1981. We didn't get HIV testing till 1985. The first AIDS treatments, and the very rudimentary AIDS treatment, AZT, didn't come in until 1987. So within that 6-year period, and AZT was pretty shit anyway. It wasn't until 89, 90 that we actually got some treatments which had been developed specifically for HIV. AZT had been a failed anti-cancer drug, which had been put on the shelf, and then in 87, somebody had said, "Oh, why don't we try that and see if that works?" And that's basically it. So AZT is a pretty shit drug. So you've got that period from, well, really 82, when people became aware of AIDS, right the way up to 87, 88, 89, when we had no real hopes of treatment. And so people were basically kind of having to try to work out for themselves what they thought the best approach was. So people adopted a whole load of sort of different strategies. Some are very, sensible. Some are sort of, basic, just live a stress-free life, reduce your level of stress. We can kind of assume from that, if you live a stress-free life, that's bound to boost your immune system. Do lots of exercise, eat a healthy diet, and so on and so forth. So there was that, and people did meditation. A lot of people did meditation. But on the other hand, there were people who just adopted any silly practice. People, they would believe, people who said AIDS, like Louise Hay, the woman I love to hate. Louise Hay wrote a book called You Can Heal Your Life. Basically, she made fucking millions. Fucking scandalous. She made millions out of people's desperation. Basically, her philosophy was, any illness, your body is not at ease with itself. So she came up with this just bizarre theory about AIDS, that AIDS is actually caused because gay men are so obsessed with youth and beauty, they don't want to live till old age anyway. So basically the sort of the cure for AIDS, according to Louise Hay, was just learn to love yourself more.
Oh, jeez.
My point in all of that is this is where I Will Survive comes in. It was within that context of where there was no easily accessible, guaranteed treatment for AIDS or HIV. It was down to you as the individual. And so I Will Survive, basically it was almost like a mantra of people living with AIDS. It's, I've the willpower, I have the will to live, I have the will, I will survive, I will survive. And the first person living with AIDS I ever met was in San Francisco in 1983. There was a guy called Bobby Campbell. The name may not mean anything to you, but Bobby Campbell was, obviously San Francisco was one of the areas most badly hit in the very early years. Campbell was one of the first people to come out openly and say, I have AIDS. He kind of attended all sorts of public meetings and things, which is where I met him. And in his own words, he described himself as the AIDS poster boy. So Bobby Campbell is actually sort of very famous, if you like, in AIDS history. When I met him, he was wearing a badge. The badge said, I will survive. And I will always remember that. And so, I Will Survive was a memorable song, an important song.
I've just been tearing up a few times as you've just been telling that story. It gives, a whole new context to that song for me, one that I'd never considered. Thank you.
Well, just one other song, which is I don't know whether it's, I wouldn't say it's my favorite song, but it was again goes back to the AIDS thing, which was So Many Men, So Little Time, which just happened to was in the gay clubs, and I can't remember who sang it now.
I'm googling it. Don't worry. I've got here Miguel Brown.
That's her. Yes. Now that was very popular in the gay discos, but again, as AIDS unfolded, it began to take on completely different meaning.
Oh, jeez.
You see, it was an anthem for gay sexual freedom initially.
Yeah.
Free AIDS. So many men, so little time. Get out there and fuck around. And then AIDS hit, and it was then so many men with so little time. So many men have so little time. So it's actually, ironically, it was actually used in an AIDS education leaflet that I picked up when I was in San Francisco in '83, with a little cartoon guy wearing the T-shirt, so many men, so little time. So even then, it was actually being used in that context of AIDS education.
Gosh, I mean, this, music is really my life. So music, it means like so much to me. It's so interesting to talk about the different interpretations of pieces of music. One thing I always ask, and I recognise that it's quite cheesy, but my question is, if you could go back in time and
Yep.
you met yourself in 84, 85,
Yep.
what would you say to Colin?
Be a lot more focused. Be a lot more, believe a lot more in yourself. Be a lot more strategic, I think. Just everything from applying to Australia for a visa, not knowing what employment categories they were looking for. Setting up Gay East Midlands, not a fucking clue where the money was going to come from, how we were going to fill it, what should be in there, where the target market was, how we were going to distribute it, so on and so forth. More focused, more strategic. But ironically, having said all that, also believe in yourself, because I'm not sure I actually did all of that because I believed in myself. I think I did all of that because I wanted other people to like me, to see what a good guy I was, what I was doing for the community.
Yeah, I think that never really changes, does it?
I do think it's important that we understand our own history, and the battles we fought in the 80s. It wasn't just LGSM. It was, defending gays the word. It was fighting Section 28, trying to get the Police and Criminal Evidence Act changed, getting an equal age of consent and all of those kind of things. So it's important that people know who was fighting and more importantly, who was resisting.
Did you ever go to the Fallen Angel? Well, if you did, I would love to hear from you. Please share any photos or stories that you might have from that time with me through social media. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter with the user handle KAndersonMusic. You can also find out more about Colin at his website, gayinthe80s.com. Lost Spaces is not only a podcast, but a concept record as well. I've been writing songs about queer venues and the people who used to live their lives there, and will be releasing songs over the coming year. You can hear the first single, Well Groomed Boys, which is also playing underneath my talking right now on all good streaming platforms. If you liked this episode, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, left a review on the iTunes store, or just told people who you think might be interested to find out about it. I am Kay Anderson, and you have been listening to Lost Spaces.